right, brother, let's kick it over to our interview. John Nabors, 1037 The Buzz, host of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. All right, we're pleased to once again be joined by the man, John Nabors. Of course, you know him, host of the Out of Bounds 103.7 The Buzz and the outstanding Locked On Hogs podcast, which is blowing up on YouTube. I was just giving him credit for it. John, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. It's good to be on with you.
Yeah, so, hey, anticipation for this football season was through the roof there in Fayetteville. Obviously, that's why your channel's blowing up, because these fans are dying to get all the Razorback content they can get their hands on. What did you think of the opener against Cincinnati? Because I've been pumping up Arkansas all off season, and I'm curious to know what you think. I was slightly disappointed, but hell, I mean, they won the game, and I thought they played an average game, and they beat a good opponent. So what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I can kind of see the same thing you did. I was expecting a little bit more, but I don't think it was necessarily because I felt like Arkansas played like trash. I just think that Cincinnati is that good of a football team. Like, they are a good program. Luke Fickell's a great coach. And I tried to look at from the physicality perspective, because I feel like that's always kind of the biggest difference between SEC teams and group of five teams, just the physicality. And, when you play even like Texas last year, when Arkansas beat them, Arkansas, you could tell they were much more physical. They were an SEC team against a Big 12 team. But Cincinnati really did a good job of matching that physicality, defensively, offensively. And even Sam Pittman talked about that in his post-game press conference. And even Trey Knox, who had a great game, came on our radio station, and he's like, that was an SEC team. He's like, we see that physicality from some SEC teams, but there's some that aren't even that physical. So I just think that it was a really good game by Cincinnati. I think that there's definitely some things that Arkansas needs to improve on. The cornerback situation was pretty inconsistent. Hudson Clark and Dwight McGlothern were kind of the best guys, but they still, weren't amazing. And of course, the injuries to Jalen Catalon and Miles Slusher, two of the best defensive backs. Don't know the extent of those injuries, but when those guys went out, it made a big difference. So I was just a little concerned with the secondary because of those facts, but I thought the linebackers played well. I think the D line actually played better than what I thought they were going to, because that was a big question mark. And I really think the offense as a whole is going to be even better than what they were last year. You got the wide receivers, Trey Knox, I mentioned, stepping up as tight end. The offensive line was good. KJ's awesome. Rocket Sanders had a 100-yard game. So I think that there's a lot to be excited about, but I think last weekend was definitely a game of Cincinnati just being a really good football team that's probably going to win double-digit games this season once again.
Yeah, I'm glad you hit on the Arkansas offense, because I wanted to ask you, I really thought Cincinnati had a good game plan. They came out, they executed early. Arkansas, they scored the touchdown right before half. That was an impressive one. But what's the ceiling for this Arkansas offense? Because, again, I thought they played average. Maybe that's a little too harsh, because I was just so high on Arkansas. But even that, over 200 passing, over 200 rushing, you're going to win every ball game that you do that, as long as you're not turning the ball over. So what is the ceiling for this offense with KJ Jefferson that, he deserves to be in the Heisman conversation, in my opinion?
Well, I think the ceiling is going to be a year where last year they were pretty much as balanced as you could get. They threw for a little over 2,500 yards and they rushed for a little over 2,500 yards. I mean, that's balance right there. So I think that they can even take that to a next step. Now, I think the defenses they're going to be facing this year may be tougher than some of them they faced last year. They don't have to face Georgia, which is nice. So there's that. But it'll just depend on the matchups. But I just feel like when everybody's healthy, you have an offensive line that's one of the best in the SEC. You have a wide receiver group of specifically Matt Landers, Jaden Hazelwood, and Ketron Jackson that are all big-bodied, perfectly able wide receivers that are all SEC caliber type guys. And now you have the emergence of Trey Knox at the tight end position, which they haven't had a tight end since Sam Pittman's been there that stepped up. And you see what he's capable of. And then at running backs, we mentioned Rocket Sanders. Dominic Johnson, who was awesome last year, he's been hurt, so he didn't even play. They're expecting him to be back soon. So I just feel like there's not really a weakness on this offense. Now, does that mean they're going to put up 45 points a game? No. I just don't know if they're set up that way. It'd be great. But I just think that if a team is able to stop them running, they're going to throw it. If they're able to stop them passing, they're going to run it. Like, they have so many weapons and so many different elements, and they got a great quarterback in KJ Jefferson and a great offensive coordinator in Kendall Briles. I just don't see offense in any game this year being the reason why Arkansas loses a game.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember this, John, but it was this time a year ago. I had you on the show. We were talking the Texas game, and you said keep your eye on this kid, Rocket Sanders, who you just referenced. He had a heck of a game in the opener against Cincinnati. He, was a standout in that Texas game too. But by the end of this season, do you think around the SEC, Rocket Sanders will have a reputation as being one of the best two or three running backs in the conference?
I do. I really do because he was a true freshman last year, and you saw those kind of plays that he made, that whether it's against Texas or against Ole Miss or whoever, where you're like, wow, you can see the upside of this guy. And now that he's had that year of off season, he's not a freshman anymore. He's a sophomore. He's 6'3", about 235, 240 pounds. He's got elite speed. He's like a bowling ball. Like, he doesn't go down very easily. As long as he stays healthy, I think that he could be all SEC caliber by the end of the season, which is saying something because there's a lot of good running backs in this league. But just the way that the offense is set up, and Sam Pittman has made it clear that Rocket Sanders is the number one running back. He's going to get the load, even though guys like AJ Green, Dominic Johnson, Rashad Dabinian, the freshman, they're going to get some carries. Rocket's the guy. And so as long as you're going to have an offense with KJ running that RPO, you're going to have that offensive line in front of them. I could see, honestly, Rocket running for over 100 yards in most games this year. I think he's a 1,000-yard rusher for sure. And I think that having a weapon like him, because he's also, people don't know this, at a high school, he played wide receiver. And so he has that element to his game to where he can play running back, but if you need to toss it to him, he's got great hands. He knows the elements of getting on the outside too. So I think he's going to be one of the premier running backs when it's all said and done at the end of the season, at least in the SEC.
And which newcomer for Arkansas impressed you the most in the opener, be it a transfer or a freshman or whatever?
See, they had a few of them stand out. Drew Sanders, he's been my guy I've been really high on. He had 2 sacks in this game, and you can see the speed and the athleticism that he has coming off the edge. I really liked what we saw from him. And also Jaden Hazelwood. He caught that great touchdown pass from KJ, and he had 3 guys around him. He ducked down just in time and got into the end zone. And so that's what you look for. So those 2 guys were good. Even Matt Landers had some, you could see some potential there too. But another guy is Jordan Dominic, who's actually the all SEC defensive lineman of the week for that strip sack that he had, where not only did he sack the quarterback, but he also got the fumble. And he had a great game. And people forget that he's a transfer. So honestly, most of the best players and best plays from Arkansas were all from transfers on Saturday. But I would have to say either Drew Sanders or Jaden Hazelwood are the ones that probably look the best.
How big of a concern is it with the secondary? You mentioned it there. Not the perfect debut there against Cincinnati. And, of course, we don't know Jalen Cattle and Miles Slusher if they're even going to play here against South Carolina, which Spencer Rattler, and they got some new weapons to work with. How big of a concern is that going into this game?
Into this game, it's probably going to get me in trouble. But into this game, I don't think it's an issue, because I don't see it as Spencer Rattler. I know that you got to respect him as a team. You got to respect him as a player. But that offensive line for South Carolina is not good. It's not. And Arkansas's defensive line is improved from last year. It's not perfect, but it's improved. And I think that Spencer Rattler is going to be on the run a lot in this game in Fayetteville. And I just don't see him causing some problems for the secondary for Arkansas. Now, you still got to respect him. He gets out on the run. He can make some plays. But I think that as long as you have Hudson Clark and Dwight McLaughlin out there, doing their thing, and I know that they're going to get guys like Simeon Blair at the safety position, get him some run too. You have enough there to still be okay. Now, if you're going up against Bama or Ole Miss, one of these teams that has an electric offense, then I would be a little bit more concerned. But I feel like in this game, if Catalan and Slusher can't go, which it doesn't look like they're going to, I still feel like Arkansas has enough weapons defensively to keep South Carolina and keep Spencer Rattler in check.
Now, I know this is something you just hit on in your most recent show. Go check it out if you haven't already. But the importance of this game for Arkansas's overall season. Hell, we know what the gauntlet the West is. Arkansas, they just can't afford to lose to an East team if they're going to have any dream of getting to Atlanta, can they?
No, not at all. I mean, that's the thing where Arkansas has a great home schedule this year. They have Bama, LSU, Ole Miss, and South Carolina all at home. They have Cincinnati at home. like as we saw them just play. Like they have some of their toughest games besides maybe BYU and Mississippi State. Those games are on the road, but all their toughest games are at home. And that's great. But South Carolina is a team that you're better than, and you have them at home. So you need to win that. You don't want to be getting behind the eight ball where suddenly now it's like, okay, we got to make up for that loss somewhere on the schedule. And there's not a whole lot of opportunities because I think Ole Miss is a better team than South Carolina. I think for sure Bama, BYU, Auburn may be better than them. We'll see. LSU, they're a disaster. So who knows what the crap they're going to be looking like by the time November comes around. But overall, I just feel like this is a game where you're at home. It is an 11 a.m. game. That's one thing, but it's an extremely winnable game that you're a better team than. So go out and prove it. If you can't do that, I don't know if there's enough time or enough games to make up for it, but you should be able to beat all the teams that you're better than this season, and especially when you have them at home, which you are better than South Carolina, and that game is at home.
Yeah, speaking of the game being at home, we're seeing Pittman here. He's rallying the troops, got to show up, got to be loud, got to be intimidating. He mentions time and time again, he mentions that trip to Georgia, even though that was a noon game. Those fans in Athens were at an 11. What type of environment are you anticipating Razorback Stadium here on Saturday? Is it going to be a hostile environment?
Oh yeah, I think so. I know it's 11 a.m. and the sun was really bad last weekend in Fayetteville, like 3 o'clock game or 2:30 game. People in the sun for the most part. It was upper 80s, so it was warm. But this weekend's going to be a little cooler, but you're going to be in the sun the entire time because it's an 11 a.m. game. But the environment will be there because it's still an SEC team. It's an SEC game. The weather is going to be beautiful. I think at kickoff it's going to be like 78 degrees. So I mean, it's going to be a beautiful day. And fans are just they're pumped, man. They're hyped for this team. I'm sure you've seen it on your podcast from Razorback fans, just the excitement that they have. And so if it's a big game, especially, it's going to be hostile. And people want this game to start off the right way. They want the edge to get there early. And so I think it'll be there. And it's funny you bring up that Georgia game because I agree with Sam Pittman, but I'm also like, okay, Coach Pitt, that was a top 10 matchup with College Game Day being there too. Like it was a much bigger deal. Like if this was Alabama at 11 a.m. and College Game Day was here, yeah, it wouldn't even be a question. But I still think it'll be solid just because it is an SEC opponent. Fans are excited. It's going to be a beautiful day. And with that north end zone and closing that they had over the past few years, it's pretty hostile there. It gets very loud as we saw against Cincinnati in that game too.
So what's the path for Arkansas to win this football game? What's got to happen on Saturday?
Well, I kind of alluded to it. You got to get pressure on Spencer Rattler. Like their offensive line is not good at South Carolina. Your defensive line is improved. You got a great pass rusher in Drew Sanders. Get after Spencer Rattler. You get after him. You pressure him into making mistakes. He threw 2 picks last Saturday. I'm thinking that if they can do that same type of thing, get him rattled and no pun intended, and end up throwing some picks, that's going to be the difference in here. You cannot let him sit back there though, because he is still a good quarterback. He's not. I don't think he's as great as what everyone makes him out to be, but he still is a good quarterback. If he just sits back there and waits with no pressure, he's going to beat you with it. So if you can get pressure on him, have him cost them some mistakes, I think that'll be great for Arkansas. And then offensively, establishing that run. Like that's something that was tough to do against Cincinnati because they were physical up front, especially on the defensive line. So I think South Carolina is still a physical team, but not as much. If you can get Rocket to get another 100 yards, you can get KJ to that 75 to 100-yard game and just keep them honest. I think that physicality will really wear down South Carolina later in the game. So you do those two things, I think Arkansas wins this game easily.
All right, moment of truth, John. Can I nail you down to a prediction for this game? Who you got a score prediction or anything like that?
Yeah, I think Arkansas wins. I think the last time I checked, they were an 8.5-point favorite in this game. So I still think Arkansas wins. I think it'll be again, not trying to be disrespectful. It'll be an easier game for them than last weekend because it was just I felt that good about Cincinnati and how good they were. So I think Arkansas wins. I think they win by multiple possessions. I think it may be close at times, but Arkansas is never in danger of losing it. So I say Arkansas wins this game. Final score 38-24. Take care of business, and they're 2-0 heading into Missouri State next weekend.
All right. Thank you so much, John. Outstanding stuff. Before you leave, tell the audience what's the best way to find all your work.
Yeah, you can follow me on all forms of social media, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is. Buzz John Nabors, Nabors. You can find all that stuff there. Also subscribe to the Locked On Razorbacks podcast on YouTube. especially as it's been growing rapidly. You can do it there or wherever podcasts are found for all your Razorback content. It's the best way to check it out. And yeah, we have some fun. I talk trash. I don't try to make anyone too mad, but just know it's all in fun. And I'm a Razorback fan. I haven't been able to talk trash in a while, so it's always a good time on social media. So you can check me out on those platforms.
Oh, one more thing I forgot.
Yeah.
Obviously Neighbors. You watched the Sunday night game. It was Neighbors for LSU. It was blowing the damn game for them. What was that? Any relation?
Surprisingly, no, if you can believe it. Yeah, we don't know family heritage here, but it is funny because my last name is spelled different from how Neighbors is actually spelled. Like your next door neighbor, it's Neighbors. Well, mine's Nabors. So I'm like, man, mine's dumb. Who would spell their name like that? And then I see this guy from LSU. It's Nabers. So I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, what? It's like, how many different spellings of Neighbors does there need to be? But yeah, when I saw him muff those 2 punts, I'm like, man, you're putting shame on the neighbor's name, man. You're putting shame on it. So yeah, that was a pretty funny thing, especially hearing Joe Tessitore say Neighbors all the time. I'm like, kept kind of looking up and seeing, oh yeah, he's talking about him. So yeah, that was a pretty cool thing, but he needs to catch those punts a little bit easier and stop shaming the name.
All right, Shane. So hey, John, appreciate him hopping on the line. He's picking the Arkansas Razorbacks. No surprise. We're 3 for 3, Shane, for having homers on the show and making homer picks. So I'm curious